There is a story in the Old Testament that is widely regarded as one of the most unsettling in the entire Bible, and some consider it the worst event in Scripture. This episode is found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges. Many are familiar with the passage from chapter 19, but few continue until the end. This story, although disturbing, offers valuable lessons that are crucial to understand. The narrative will be explored in detail, and then the teachings will be reflected on. The journey will begin with Judges, chapter 19, verse 1. In the absence of a king in Israel during that period, a Levite resided in the mountainous region of Ephraim. He engaged in a marital relationship with a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. It is noteworthy that the Levite's residence was in the northern region, while the woman's was in the southern region. After a period of time, the woman became unfaithful and departed, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem. In the absence of a monarch, the Israelites inhabited a region characterized by the presence of a Levite residing in the mountainous region of Ephraim. The Levite, who was from Bethlehem in Judah, took as a concubine a woman from Bethlehem in Judah. It is noteworthy that the Levite resided in the northern region, while the woman resided in the southern region. After a period of time, the woman committed adultery and departed, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, where she remained for approximately 4 months. Upon learning of her return to her father's house, the Levite made the decision to pursue her. He embarked on a journey from Ephraim to the south, traversing Bethlehem, with the objective of bringing her back. Upon his arrival, he was cordially received by the woman's father, who welcomed him with hospitality. On several occasions, the Levite attempted to depart with his wife, but his father prevented him from doing so. The Levite remained in the household for approximately 4 months. Upon learning of her return to her father's house, the Levite set out to pursue her. He journeyed from Ephraim to the south, arriving in Bethlehem with the intention of reuniting with her. However, upon his arrival, he was greeted warmly by the woman's father, who welcomed him hospitably. The Levite attempted to depart with his wife on several occasions, but his father-in-law insisted on his stay for an additional night. This pattern of behavior persisted until several days had passed, after which the Levite determined it was time to depart. He expressed gratitude for the hospitality he had received and set out on his return journey with the woman. Tragically, however, as they traversed the southern Israeli territory en route to their destination, events took a distressing turn. The narrative recounts how the in-law insisted on prolonging the sojourn, and this state of affairs persisted until several days had elapsed. At this juncture, the Levite, expressing gratitude for the hospitality he had received, embarked on the return journey, accompanied by the woman. However, a tragic turn of events occurred during the return trip. As they traversed the territory from the southern reaches of Israel towards the northern city of Jebus, the servants proposed that they seek lodging there for the night. The Levite, however, declined this suggestion, opting instead to proceed to Gibeah, where he anticipated receiving a warm welcome from an Israelite. Upon their arrival in Gibeah, however, they encountered a surprising lack of hospitality, a stark contrast to the generally welcoming nature of the Israelite people. As dusk fell, an elderly man discovered them in the city square. Learning that they had nowhere to stay, the man invited them into his home. The Levite accepted the offer immediately, assuring the host that they had provisions and only required a place to rest. They settled in and appeared secure, but then a terrible incident occurred. A group of men from the city encircled them. As dusk fell, an elderly man discovered a pair of strangers in the square. He learned they had nowhere to stay and graciously invited them into his home. The Levite accepted the offer immediately, assuring the host that they had provisions and only required a place to rest. They settled in and appeared to be safe, but then something terrible happened. A group of men from the city surrounded the house, demanding that the Levite be handed over to them so they could abuse him. This act of perversion and violence reveals the degraded state of Gibeah. In a curious gesture, the host attempted to pacify the men by offering them his own daughter and the Levite's concubine, in an attempt to prevent them from attacking his guest. When the men rejected the offer, the incident in question reveals the deplorable state of Gibeah, as evidenced by the men's demand for the Levite's abduction and subsequent mistreatment. In a desperate attempt to appease the men, the Levite offered his own daughter and the Levite's concubine, hoping to prevent an attack on his guest. However, when the men refused, the Levite, in a last-ditch effort to save his concubine, relented and handed her over to them. The men proceeded to sexually assault her throughout the night. By the following morning, the Levite discovered his concubine gravely injured and collapsed at the door of his house. The following morning, upon opening the door, the Levite found his concubine deceased, her hands resting on the threshold. He called her name, hoping to rouse her, but to no avail. In a state of extreme desperation, the Levite relinquished his concubine to the men. The men proceeded to violate her throughout the night. At dawn, they released her, and she, with severe injuries, managed to return to the door of the Levite's house, where she collapsed. The following morning, upon opening the door, the Levite found his concubine deceased, her hands resting on the threshold. He called her to get up and continue the journey, but she did not respond. She had lost her life after the night of abuse. In a shocking act, he placed her body on his donkey and continued his way back home. Upon his arrival, he made a disturbing decision. He divided the woman's body into 12 parts and sent each part to the tribes of Israel, drawing attention to the atrocity committed by his own compatriots, the tribe of Benjamin. This act had repercussions across the entire nation. The tribes were horrified by what had happened, something unprecedented since the exodus from Egypt. Indignation and perplexity filled the people, who gathered to discuss how to react. This tragedy led to a civil war between the tribes. The tribe of Benjamin committed an atrocity that had repercussions across the entire nation. This act, which was unprecedented since the exodus from Egypt, filled the tribes with horror. The people gathered to discuss how to react, and indignation and perplexity filled the room. This tragedy led to a civil war between the tribes of Israel and Benjamin, resulting in thousands of deaths on both sides. The episode ended with the tribe of Benjamin nearly wiped out, leaving only 600 men. Faced with this situation, the other tribes began to fear that one of their own tribes would disappear. Without women to marry and perpetuate the lineage, the continuity of their people was threatened. The episode culminated in the near extermination of the tribe of Benjamin, leaving a mere 600 men. This development led to a perceived threat to the survival of the Benjaminites, as the other tribes feared the same fate. To avert this crisis, the tribes devised a solution involving the abduction of 400 women from a neighboring clan to be given to the men of Benjamin. However, this measure still left 200 men without wives. In response, the Israelites implemented a controversial solution during a festival, allowing the men of Benjamin to abduct women to marry, which the tribes confronted a dilemma when they realized that the absence of Benjamin's leadership had resulted in a situation where his people had no one to answer to. This predicament led to the decision to attack a neighboring clan and take 400 women as wives for the men of Benjamin. However, this action left 200 men without spouses. In an effort to address this imbalance, the Israelites proposed a controversial solution during a festival. The men of Benjamin would be permitted to abduct women as wives, provided that this action would not violate the vow of the tribes not to give their daughters to the Benjaminites. These events illustrate the repercussions of hasty decisions and how a single misguided action can cascade into a series of similarly unfortunate consequences. The consequences of the choices made by Israel directly affected innocent lives, despite the transgressions of the perpetrators. The text conveys a series of lessons through its depiction of the consequences of poor decisions and the absence of leadership. The first lesson is that the absence of responsibility can lead to grave mistakes. The opening verse illustrates how a lack of leadership and accountability can trigger disorderly and morally corrupt behavior among the people. When there is no one to answer to, we tend to make impulsive decisions without considering the consequences. The second lesson is the importance of treating every human being with dignity, recognizing that everyone bears the image of God. In the account, the host suggested offering his own daughter, and the concubine to the text conveys a message of protection for guests, emphasizing the value of human life. It underscores the imperative to honor the inherent dignity of all individuals and to refrain from the tendency to objectify or dehumanize others. The narrative also highlights the peril of straying from divine guidance, illustrating how Israel's deviation from the divine led to a decline in the book of Judges. Principles. The culmination of this decay is evident in the final chapters, illustrating how a departure from divine principles can give rise to unthinkable actions. The farther we deviate from God, the more susceptible we become to error. Another salient lesson is that the consequences of erroneous decisions are unavoidable and frequently extend beyond our imagination. Although the transgression committed by the Benjaminites' transgression was heinous, yet the tribe's decision to retaliate resulted in the demise of numerous innocents and widespread suffering. This underscores the notion that every decision has consequences that are often beyond our complete control. Additionally, even in the face of failure and destruction, there is a manifestation of God's grace. Despite the severe repercussions, God's benevolence persists. The Benjaminites' actions were deplorable. The decision of the tribes to retaliate resulted in the death of numerous innocents and caused widespread suffering. It is important to recognize that every decision has consequences that are often beyond our control. Despite the severe repercussions, God allowed the tribe of Benjamin to rebuild, and Israel restructured itself after these events. The book of Judges concludes with the following phrase: "In those days there was no king in Israel. Each person did what seemed right in their own eyes." It is crucial to understand the significance of our decisions, recognizing that each choice has a lasting impact.